All right, guys, welcome to another Friday edition of the GPP Strategy Show. Always one of my favorite shows to do. And this week we have a special guest. It is, of course, Gary Hartman. Some of you guys might recognize him from the top of the NBA leaderboards, the NFL DFS leaderboards. Also over at Establish the Run, has made a few appearances as an honored guest on Establish the Million. And today we are going to pick his brain about his DFS process, about this Week 14 slate. Let's get to it.
I suffer from a debilitating condition known as atrophic chokitis.
Peter's one of the greatest depositors I've ever seen.
Trust the process. Let's go. Let's go.
I got auto matched with Levitan. This is bullshit.
If I just go the other way, in that 66, I win all the money. All the money.
If I had 150 lineups, I'd win too.
Process over results.
Make a bitch go crazy. I don't know which one of these my baby. Bust out AP, close 5 bullets to your head like KD. Bust it, bitch go bust it. And I had 10 pints with me in Russia.
Hey everyone.
Gary Hartman, welcome to the show. How are we doing?
I'm good, man. That opening gets me every time. It cracks me up.
Yeah, you know, we got to play the hits. We got to get warmed up here for this DFS slate. Normally it's on Lulz, which is our show where we only allow guests on if they've won the Millymaker. But now that I have you on here, I'm starting to think I should make it a rule for this show as well.
I like it. It makes sense for GPPs. You get all the hits in there for the GPP bros.
Yeah, and I was letting people know in the Discord that you were going to be on the show, and everyone was saying that you've been running really, really nicely in NBA lately. And I'm not in the NBA streets, but it sounds like that's where you've been focusing some time as well.
Yeah, well, that's my main gig over at ETR. Started last season, kind of help out behind the scenes. I'm also on the live show with Dink a couple times a week, pre-lock. So definitely, grinding NBA hard most nights, not every night. Certain nights I'll take off, but yeah, I'm still tilting because I won the putback, the 4max the other night. But I would have taken down any GPP on the site, and I just didn't have the lineup in the right tourneys. But hey, a win's a win. I'll take it.
So are you it sounds like you're like Dink then, in that you are trying to juggle, the kind of relentless stuff with NBA DFS. And then at what point in the week are you kind of shifting your focus, starting to look at the slate, get familiar with what you want to do?
For NFL?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm absorbing content throughout the week. Obviously, like I'm reading, I'm doing my own research. I'm listening to a lot of pods and things like that. But I don't really like sit down and get into the lab, if you will, until like late Saturday night. Where I'm starting to actually build. But, by that point, I have a good idea, at least, of like what my general player pool will be. But yeah, I've always been that way, though, kind of like night before the test study kind of guy. So yeah,
I was talking about it on my Monday lineup review, how like when I'm doing content, I look at the first look, when I do that show on a Monday, or then I'm doing the Swolecast on a Wednesday, and I kind of try to zap my memory of whatever my takes are. It's like whatever information's available at the time, you could give your opinion on that. But then so much is going to change that it can be incredibly worthless to devote too much time to something until, Sunday AM.
Well, exactly. I mean, last week's a perfect example. I mean, the second Gardner Minshew was named starter, really, all of your plans pretty much go up in the air. Because at that point, you at least have to consider, making some changes to what you were planning on doing. So, it's probably helpful to wait as long as you can, but I also think you give yourself a disadvantage if you're not even looking or reading or doing research up until, Saturday, Sunday, every time. So,
and I obviously know you won the Millymaker. I'm not familiar with the story, the lineup. Can you tell people a little bit about that? Was it a hand build? Was it MME? What was the lowdown on that?
Yeah, it was week 8 last season. I had actually just started MMEing around that time. So, I've been playing DFS for years, but was definitely just a hand builder, kind of growing into more and more of max entry and things like that. But I had just started in the middle of last season and, got subscriptions at sites like ETR and things like that. And I was, one of my first weeks doing that. It was the week the Chiefs were playing the Jets. They were favored by like 21 points. Mahomes.
Yes.
No one was on
it. Braxton Berrios, Denzel Mims bring back week.
And I had Mims in my lineup somehow with his 6 points that managed to get it done. But yeah, it was also Dalvin Cook's first week back from injury. And he was like, I don't know, like 10% owned or something. I think I had 30%.
It was Nyheim Hines 2 touchdown week as well, I believe.
It may have been. I don't think Hines was in my lineup, but I know Hines was right around that time. Hines was kind of in a couple perfect lineups as well. So it was, it was Mahomes to Kelsey, and I had Demarcus Robinson in there as well, and Mims and Dalvin Cook and DK Metcalf, Kendrick Bourne, who holds a special place in my heart as well. But yeah, it was one of those weeks. People were just off it because of the big spread for the Chiefs, and it worked out well.
That's so funny because there's not too many weeks that I could recall with that same specificity, but we had Brian Hooper, Brick 75, on the show that week leading up to that week last year, and he showed his sim results, and his sim results basically had the nuts. It was that Mahomes with the Mims bring back, and he had Hines in his, and I'm pretty sure Dalvin Cook. And so everyone was like, my God, these sim results. So it is, it's funny that that was also the week you took it down.
Yeah, I mean, people get so scared of those big spreads. And I mean, we'll talk about the Chiefs this week also, not that it's that big of a spread, but they beat the Raiders 41-14 a couple weeks ago. So almost a very similar score to what happened that week. I mean, my thought at that time is if the Chiefs are going to ever get to that 40-point mark or win by that 21-point spread, they're going to have to do it through the air for the most part. So I wasn't scared off, and obviously it paid off.
Yeah, it's funny too. Like you said, we'll get into slate specific stuff, but now the concern is, do the Chiefs even have that extra gear to, and last year it was, will their foot be off the gas by the time the fourth quarter rolls around?
Yeah, no, now they're just a defensive juggernaut. Apparently that's it.
Goodness.
Yeah.
And, did it sounds like if that was one of your first MME experiences, has it just been all downhill from there? I mean, did it just ruin your expectations? You're like, oh, put 150 and win the Millie, easy game.
Yeah, obviously I'm going to win the Millie every year at that point. No. I mean, I knew there was an aspect of, let's say, luck to it, or whatever you want to say, that I happened to hit in one of my first weeks doing it. But no, I mean, I've had success MMEing since then. And I'm pretty confident I'll do it again at some point. So I should have, honestly, earlier this season, I took down the slant with also the best lineup on the site and just late swapped it in the Millie to off the nuts, which I would have won the Millie again earlier this season. So
what is your kind of regular contest selection on a standard main slate?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm mostly a Draftkings player. I'll do some single entry stuff on FanDuel, but especially during NBA season, I'm just stretched too thin to be MMEing on two sites, and I'm much more comfortable with the Draftkings format. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm MMEing the Millie, and then I'll play kind of like some of the high-ish stakes, single entry, low max stuff like the Juke, the Sweep, the Spy. I do like the Game Changer single entry. I'm not playing the Thunderdome because I can't beat Leone. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I'm MMEing. And then, like anywhere from like $150 to like $2,000 single entry stuff.
So if you max the Millie in the slant, are you running the same 150 lineup set? Or are you running two different sets?
It depends on the week. Like if I had, usually it'll be the same, but if I like ran a couple different builds right before lock and I couldn't really decide between the two, maybe I'll split them up. But it's usually I'll use the same build.
And then when you're tossing stuff into like the Juke and stuff, are you like the Brick 75 Rand function doesn't matter, drop it in there, or are you kind of cherry picking some lineups that you think are catered to that field size?
I'm hand building those.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think I've had more success hand building, especially this season, necessarily than MME. I mean, at times I will take one of my highest projected lineups if I really like the look of it and throw it in there. But for the most part, I'm hand building and kind of getting exposures where I want to be.
I was going to say, so how does that work? Like if you, I guess 2-part question, do you hand build after you get your 150 sets locked in? And then are you using kind of the players or exposures you're heavy on to inform your hand builds? Or are you looking like, hey, the math really likes this, but in this hand build, I want to make sure I get some of this. How are you handling the differences between those two?
Yeah, it's like a mix of all of that. Honestly, I'll probably hand build it before I run the Opto, and then kind of see if I'm off places or if I'm trying to get a little bit too cute in some of the, small field stuff or whatever it may be. And then maybe I'll adjust. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, no, I mean, I think I use intuition a lot more than some other, MME type players. I use the math and the math guides me, but, if I have a feel on a player, I won't be afraid to take that stand.
Yeah, I was asking Leone about you to get some more insight on some questions, and he said you're willing to get your hand in the dirt, maybe a little bit more than some of the other MME guys.
Yeah, I think that's a fair representation of me.
Yeah. So in what way? Because I had Lord Reeves, Rich Rebar on a few weeks ago, and he was doing some of that as well to kind of inform his process and trying to find, those micro edges, whether that's how a defense specifically, covers, opposing wide receivers or however that may shake out. Are those the kind of things that you're looking into that might not be reflected in projections?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of that, just like straight up matchup stuff. And just, I think trying to be contrarian in different ways. Like, I think you can get, you can be contrarian around certain chalk environments. And I think that's kind of what I tried to do. Instead of like just direct pivots off somebody, maybe I'll try to, have a different combination than somebody else might have, for example, like stacking a running back with the quarterback more often than some other people may, or things like that. So I kind of think that's kind of where I'm trying to differentiate myself a little bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So how much bowling of the optimizer will you do? Obviously you have your rules and your stuff like that for getting your stacks and correlations, but are you actually going in and sometimes tweaking projections if you think you have a football take that might not be baked in?
Yeah, I'll do that for those two reasons. One, for a football take, which I don't try to get too crazy with that. I'm not an expert, although I think I know a solid amount about the game. But or if I'm just trying to manipulate where my stand is on someone, if I'm trying to get above the field or below the field on someone, with that because for the most part, so many people are using projections these days, and especially if they're MMEing, you put in good projections like at ETR, you're gonna end up around the field on a lot of these guys. So I'll definitely be manipulating a good bit, mostly on projection, less so on exposure caps, but I will do that as well.
What would you say are kind of the two, biggest differences to, say, the texture of your lineups or your exposures in a 150 max in the slant versus, say, your 3 max in the juke? Where do you see the style of those lineups deviating the most?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, in those 150s, you're trying to hit the stone cold nuts. I'll be a little less stringent around, hardcore correlations, the need for bringbacks, things like that, where in the 3 max stuff or small field stuff, I'll probably have more of some of your traditional correlation methods, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's been, I feel like, the hot topic of conversation this year of, forcing the bring back. And I feel like the more lineups I see this year, and I don't know if it's because, the field and the meta is changing or if the actual results are changing, or I guess I'm having a hard time untangling that. But when I look at lineups, there's far less double stacks with bringbacks. I felt like that was way more popular just across lineups last year.
I think it's a couple things. Like, I just don't think it's as simple as, hey, things are changing or not changing. One thing that is changing, though, is quarterback pricing being tighter this year. And I think that kind of impacts that a little bit. But I just think in general, it doesn't necessarily have to be so stringent as people make it seem to be for large field GPP stuff. Like, at the end of the day, you just need the right plays. Like, yeah, leverage is important. Correlation is important. But you need the right guys. You need to hit the stone cold nuts to win those tournaments. So, if it's a skinny stack with no bring back in an environment that you thought definitely needed to bring back, that might be what it is. And like most of the time, I'm still going to have bringbacks in most of these environments, but like I will spread it out in my optimizer where I'll let some of these stacks basically not have a bring back or whatever it may be. I think what's more important in those things is kind of getting away from the, kind of group think or just general, options that people think that they have when they're using Tom Brady, that they absolutely have to then double stack Godwin and Evans or whatever it is. I'm actually looking to get like different types of double stacks in there than what the field is, because I think people are just like so quick to say, oh, we need their top 2 targets on this quarterback, when it's usually, not only is it not that simple, I think it's just the wrong thing to do a lot of the time. Because a lot of times we're looking just for pure ceiling in these tournaments. And a lot of the times, like the top wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, or 1A, 1B, whatever it may be, are actually canceling each other out from a ceiling perspective. So like I'm actually kind of going away from certain things like that, where I think the field, at least in recent years, and maybe it's changing a little bit this year, was just so quick to kind of be throwing that kind of thing in.
Yeah. And how much, in your 150 sets are you looking at cumulative or product ownership to try to keep that in check? Are you kind of forcing a guy sub 10% projected ownership? What kind of things do you do to make sure that you have a chance to hit the nuts, but there is enough contrarian there to actually get there?
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying, I think leverage is still important, and from a macro point of view, I'm still just looking for contrarian spots. So I do think kind of that, 70 to 120 or whatever you want to say, at 70 to 125 on Draftkings cumulative ownership. I think that stuff works, and I do set that as a rule. And then kind of around that, I won't worry as much as long as I know I have that kind of basic, range set. From there, Yeah, I mean, I'm looking for more contrarian plays than not generally as a general state of thought, but I'm not worrying if I have like 20% guys in my lineups. If it's the right combination, it's the right combination.
Yeah. Are you a lock button guy? Like if you feel like you have a big edge on a specific stack or play, will you just put them into 150 or you still let the exposure shake out?
Yeah, no, usually I won't lock button, but I will let it get up pretty high if I have a confident take on someone. But yeah, I mean, I'm probably more likely to lock button in NBA than I am in NFL.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And do you, like, circling back to your hand build stuff, how much are you then kind of using your projections or stuff to make those lineups? Because I think that's a thing we've talked about a lot on the show this year with hand build, and the risk being sometimes you're sacrificing too many projected points. I'm curious, how do you make sure you're not doing that?
Yeah, honestly, I probably don't look at it enough for the projections when I'm hand building. Like I think at that point when I'm ready to sit down and make my hand builds, I have a good amount of ideas of what stacks I want to use or what quarterback I want to use or whatever it may be. And I kind of build it out from there. And then if I really just don't have a good feel for it, like if I hand built my 3 juke lineups or whatever, and I'm iffy on if this is the right stuff, then I'll turn to projections as kind of a tiebreaker or a guide. But I would be lying if I say I use it as kind of like a principle when I'm hand building. I'm more kind of just going with the stacks or the spots that I like to have. And usually what I'll do is it'll end up around a higher projection point because I'll at least want to, like, I'll have the 3 or 4 spots that I know I want to hit in that week, whether it's Buffalo, Tampa Bay, then KCLV, and say I want a spot from Dallas, Washington, whatever, whether it's like the spot or the pivot around that, I'll probably make sure that guy's in that lineup in some capacity. And most of the time I'm not sacrificing too much projection with my end result.
How do you handle, whenever I've even had an inkling to maybe mess around with NFL MME, I start to get massively overwhelmed thinking about late swap, because that's a huge part of my game for single entry and 3 max, and something I feel like I can, really hone in on and make the best possible decision. So how are you thinking about that from a MME perspective, or how do you pull that off?
Honestly, like I'm just keeping a close eye on my lineups throughout the 1 o'clocks, like scrolling a lot, seeing what I actually may have in play with minutes remaining or quarters remaining, whatever. And I'm trying to do as much manual as I can. I don't like swap optimizing or full on rebuilding for NFL. For NBA, I think it's a pretty crucial part of the process. But I don't like it for NFL so much. So, I'm kind of the traditional stuff that people have talked about quite a bit with late swap. If you have something that's really hit the nuts early on and you're ahead of the field, it could make sense to get chalkier. If you are a little bit behind, you want to get more contrarian. I'm just doing that as manually as I can. Obviously, as I mentioned, kind of that example, from 2 months ago or whatever, it kind of came back to screw me on a lineup that was pretty contrarian. I thought I had to get chalkier. I was wrong, and it screwed me in the milli. So I try also not to get, too crazy with late swap, although I know the importance of it.
Yeah. What are there lessons that from NBA DFS that you are able to apply to NFL DFS? I'm wondering how much of kind of those skills are transferable, or is it just so much of its own beast that you have to view it on its own?
That's a good question. I mean, the easy answer is they're totally different beasts, right? Like standard deviation and median, are just so different in NBA. But I do think there probably are some lessons. The things I do in NBA that are, I guess, different than NFL to an extent are like, min maxes on teams are very strict, and things like that. You're looking at team total and game environment, perhaps even more than you are in NFL. But I think that there is some lessons just in that sense that, like, in NBA, you can have a 10-game slate or whatever, and I could pretty much cross out a game, just by looking at, whatever, it's Celtics Pistons with a 199 over under. It's a 7 o'clock start. You're getting no leverage by putting these people in your slate. And there's, you can go to Tatum, but there's 5 or 6 other 10K guys on this slate later on that have the same ceiling. So like I can do a decent job crossing that out. I think what I've learned to do in the NFL is it's kind of okay to do that there too, for the most part. I try to keep a pretty narrow player pool. That's one of the things that I really, really try to do for MME. I really want to limit my combinations. So I'm looking at ceiling, first and foremost. That's my most important thing. And if basically I'm asking myself, can a player hit this X ceiling? If they cannot, I'm basically eliminating them from my pool. So I think you can kind of take game environments in the NFL and almost X them out altogether as well. And that's kind of something I've learned from NBA, and it's worked for me so far for NFL.
Yeah, definitely. Circling back to that thing where you mentioned that you feel like you can take down another Millymaker. Obviously, you need that kind of confidence, but we also know even players with a big edge, they could play the Millymaker, 5-10 years and never realize that edge. So how do you balance the math side of your brain, knowing that it's unlikely, but yet the confidence side and knowing you have an edge and thinking you can do it and it's worth chasing?
That's a good question. I don't know. I guess it's just staying confident, but I guess just my ability to, if I am MMEing this every week, like knowing that I have a good chance of at least making a solid amount of money back, keeps me going, like it's very, very rare that I'm getting completely wiped out. So, I won it last year. I could have easily won it again this year. I guess it's just kind of in the results that give me the confidence to think that I can get this done. We'll see. I'm getting married next Saturday. We'll see how long my future wife will let me keep doing this. But as long as she will, I will, believe in my ability to get it done.
How different do you think your contest selection would be if you hadn't won the Millymaker, assuming that was a huge bankroll booster?
Yeah, pretty different. Yeah, it's hard to say because it was so early on in my MME process that like I don't know where I necessarily would have gone from there. It's almost like a door A, door B type of thing. I think I would have kept going at it, and I was, learning about playing DFS from a game theory perspective, and playing the field instead of the players necessarily, and all that kind of stuff. So I was getting there, but I don't know. I think probably quite a bit. I think maybe I wouldn't be MMEing every week, or I wouldn't be putting in, whatever the thousands of dollars that I'm putting in every Sunday. I'm sure would not be the case.
Do you have any tips for, say some of us hand builders who maybe wanted to try out MME? Obviously there's the mini max, you mentioned the slant. Do you have any tips? I feel like another question people generally have is like, well, can I MME 20 lineups in the slant because I don't have the bankroll for the full thing? Or am I going to be at a disadvantage against the 150 max guys?
No, I think that's okay. I actually think the week I won the slant this year, I think I only had like 55 lineups in there. But yeah, no, I think that's okay. I think that's a good way to practice as well. And like just kind of having your feet in that pool will give you some lessons and learn from that. But no, I mean, my biggest advice is I would recommend giving it a try. Again, I cannot stress enough what I just said. Like, I really, the key of large field things is ceiling. It's just, that is the key. If you do not think a player has a ceiling in any given week, it is not worth using them straight up. I mean, the only difference is ever in that is salary relief. And that is really should be largely correlated with your quarterback, right? So like the punt tight end or the 3,000 wide receiver or whatever, I understand that for the need of making combinations work, but I would want that heavily correlated with my game stacks at that point. Besides that, every single player in your pool should be able to hit a certain ceiling. Start there. Try to keep your player pool as tight as possible, so you're not kind of, tailing off with, terrible lineups towards the back end of your set. And I think it's worth giving it a shot. We all have access to really good projections these days. I'm sure you're absorbing tons of content like the show where you're watching right now that hopefully should be able to guide you in a certain sense. I can't, recommend the stuff we're doing over at ETR enough. So, I think the tools are out there to be a successful MME player, but it's not easy. It's a lot of work and it's takes some luck too.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's the thing too. And just making sure that you are playing within your bankroll management.
Yeah, that's very
knowing that you could be a profitable player with an edge and go 17 weeks in this regular season without having kind of a bank that actually gives you a profitable year.
Yep, exactly.
Let's see here. We are going to start to get into this main slate here, checking in on the chat. Drew says his wife late swapped off our marriage due to my DFS losses. Gary, hopefully the same does not happen to you.
I'm trying to figure out how I could play next Sunday. So I'm getting married next Saturday, and I was told I'm not playing, but I still don't think I've agreed to that. So we'll see. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, Levitan probably needs to have a heart-to-heart with you about, maybe smelling the roses on your wedding day.
Time. I think he does. Yeah. No, I'm I'm not going to play, but I have actually been avoiding qualifiers this entire year because I think it's on my wedding day, or it's the day after my wedding day. The Draftkings.
Oh, there you go.
quali.
So
Yeah.
is your wedding Saturday or Sunday?
Saturday.
Okay.
Yeah, next
All right.
Saturday, 18th. But I think there's an NFL game that day.
Oh, you're
the
right.
week
The
from
Saturday games
Yeah.
start.
I think it's a Patriot. I think the Patriots are playing actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I could get action down on Gary hand building a few lineups the day after his wedding, I would bet that.
Oh, it's going to happen like the Friday night after the rehearsals are. I'm just going to be sitting in the hotel room bored. I mean, I'm going to start hand building, I think. I don't, we'll see.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Late swapping at the altar is difficult. But you were mentioning too about just the importance to find a ceiling. And I do think, that was something I was really talking through with Leone last week when we were looking at late swaps for our tilt space lineups too. And I do, it's really tempting sometimes to be like, all right, we'll late swap. We'll do the punt guy and then get Cooper Kupp.
Yeah.
And, it's like, okay, we all know Cooper Kupp has that ceiling, but does the punt play actually have that? Can John Bates get enough points to not only, get the raw points, but actually jump some of those plays? And so that's been a key lesson to me of, you're generally trying to middle it in those situations and get up and finding two guys that legitimately have the ceiling to accomplish your goals in that contest.
Yeah, that is always, a razor thin line with late swap, right? Like the difference between getting contrarian, or having the balance projection is definitely a tough spot. I don't think there's ever a right answer there necessarily either. I think that every situation, every tournament is different depending on what position you're in. Especially some of the smaller field GPP stuff. I think you can play kind of a little bit more conservatively, but every situation is different there.
For sure. What is your snap take on this slate? I mean, we have the usual caveats. I think some of the big stuff is, will Mike Williams play? He was deemed a close contact to Keenan Allen and put on the COVID list, but he tested negative yesterday. So I believe if he can rack up a couple negative tests, he'll be in play. We have this 49ers backfield in question. I know Eli Mitchell didn't practice yesterday, but Jeff Wilson was back to a full practice. Elijah Moore has now missed a couple straight practices. So these are kind of some of the big things I'm eyeing here. But how did this slate look to you from a bird's eye view?
Yeah, it's an interesting slate, way different than the last 2 weeks, and very little value, at least natural value, which makes it tougher, but also, is more exciting from an MME perspective. Like, I think there's easier spots to get different right off the bat because there's way less value and the top end is spread out pretty evenly. I think all the ownership is going to be condensing right on that mid range. The Javonte Williams, Josh Jacobs, Hunter Renfrow, Antonio Gibson guys once again. And I think, a way to look at this slate is obviously you're going to want exposure to some of those guys as they have the ceiling in that mid-range that can get you there. But I think looking at direct pivots off those guys also makes some sense. And and I think I'd be very surprised if it's not a pay up at quarterback week as well. There obviously is the chance for a Taysom Hill or a Cam Newton, I guess, or Teddy Bridgewater. I'm not going there, but to get there. But I do think that the high end is really strong at quarterback. So it's a fun week. It's a fun week from a GPP perspective.
Yeah, I agree. And it seems like every week we're getting pretty interesting games in the 4 p.m. slate, which always make it super interesting from late swap. We have the mega value that could potentially open up at the Chargers at 4 p.m. We have the San Francisco Cincy, where there's some legit kind of injury stuff. Joe Mixon, another guy I didn't mention, didn't practice yesterday. And then we have the marquee game, Buffalo, Tampa Bay, which you have to expect is going to garner a bunch of ownership. So to me, this is setting up to take some unique stabs, some contrarian stabs early, and then you can decide how much of that chalk you want to load up on late.
Yep. I'm in complete agreement there. Yeah.
Do you have I'm looking at kind of early ownership projections here on this Bills Tampa game. It does seem like Allen is going to be more popular than Brady, which I guess kind of surprised me. Do you have any read on how the field is going to want to play this one?
Yeah, that one is really interesting. The Allen over Brady ownership. I mean, for me, I'm interested in both sides here, but I will just basically swap that ownership in my exposures. I will be, and I get the argument against Brady. The only way the Bills are going to move the balls through the air, obviously, and theoretically, the Bills have a good pass defense, although, they've had a weak schedule. They're without Tre'Davious White now. All that stuff matters. And, the Bucs are at home. If this game does play up, I think I'd rather be on the Brady side with the lower ownership for sure. Although, you could really make an argument for both sides. And, I don't know if that game fully shoots out, but I think that there is a strong percentage of the time that it does. And so I think it's worth being up there. I mean, even on ETR, we have Josh Allen at like 11.6% owned right now. Yeah, it's a little bit on the higher end for a quarterback, but it doesn't necessarily scare me. I'd be probably over the field on both guys with more Brady than Allen.
Yeah, I don't know why in my gut, my heart of hearts, I'm like, this feels like a game with a high total that actually disappoints.
It's definitely possible.
But they certainly have the fireworks, and I do like how the ownership and salaries are kind of lining up for attacking this game. It seems like people are going to prefer Fournette and Godwin. And we finally have a week where tight end looks kind of strong at the top. People now comfortable going to Kelsey and Kittle again in these spots. So Gronk might not even be over 10% now that he's up at 6K, which would be pretty interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I think Gronk's going to fall through the cracks a little bit here. And Kelsey also, and we'll get to that game in a second, but like isn't drawing that much ownership just because of price. And I think the expensive stack that him and Mahomes would be. So I think actually besides maybe Kittle, if and when Debo's fully ruled out, it looks like the ownership's going to be spread out at that tight end position. So like you're going to be able, it is a spot where you could get a little bit different if you want to take a stand on one of these guys. And in this game particularly, I think Gronk is, very worthy of taking a stand. And I think Dawson Knox also really worthy of taking a stand. I think I was reading Silva's matchups that the Bucs have given up the third most catches to tight ends. I think that's going to be a real way that they win is like in the middle of the field. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a Knox or Beasley day here.
Yeah, for sure. Because right now, just looking at tight end ownership, the only guy I'm seeing over 10%, and this is kind of weighting a few different ownership sources, is Jared Cook, who I think will definitely be popular, especially if Mike Williams is out. But yeah, it feels pretty wide open at tight end.
Yeah, and Cook's fine. I don't like that. Yeah, I'm seeing him come in through it with a lot of ownership. I'm a Giants fan. They stink. They're going to get blown out. I'm sure he will, get his. But if you really look at Cook, he really hasn't hit like his target score or paid off his price, even at that low price, much this year at all. I'd almost rather take a punt on, Big Dick Donnie P, than go to Cook, especially at that ownership. So
I know I'm laughing just thinking about, so we have the Deposit Kingdom weekly contest here for the Discord and people who watch this, and the ownership in that is always a little out of whack. I can't even imagine in the ETR Army listener league what Parham's ownership is going to be. It's going to be like 35%.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah.
Drico mentioned something here, and Leone kind of hinted at this as well, that Gary seems more willing to play higher owned guys in general than I generally hear at ETR. Is that because he plays more MME? And kind of a tag on that question, would be sometimes if you're trying to attack a popular game in a contrarian way, you run the risk of, should you just be Xing it out and hoping that game fails? So how do you think through those two things and your willingness to eat more chalky plays?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting comment. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that just as a general rule of how I play. Every slate is completely different to me. And, I will, if I feel a certain way, for example, I was wrong about this last week, but, if the whole field's going to be on Antonio Gibson, I love just going way over on Terry McLaurin. Like I do make those stands as well with the direct pivots. But, it's not necessarily that I'm willing to play higher owned guys. But if I do think a chalky guy is in the right spot and he is the right play for that week, I will not be afraid to match the field or gain leverage by going over the field too. But it's, I really do look at every spot and every slate in its own way in that sense. So yeah, maybe I'm less, afraid to attack chalk, but I'm not, seeking it out in any way. And I'm certainly willing to, and wanting to be contrarian or, go to the other side of ownership if their two guys are in the exact same spot. For Brady, in this Brady Allen is a perfect example of that.
For sure. And one dynamic that I feel like we've now seen play out a couple weeks in a row here at running back is, no, we don't have anyone at the top end that is just really projecting as like the head and shoulders best play. I guess you could squint and say Eckler is by far the best play, but in general, I look at the top 8 ceiling projected guys and they're all carrying ownership between 10 to 25%. And it makes it really hard because that Some of those guys are going to be much higher, especially in small field, and some of them are going to get squeezed. Last week, it was Leonard Fournette who got squeezed and actually came in a little low. How do you handle that when the ownership is all jumbled up at a position and there's not direct leverage opportunities?
Yeah, it's a tough week for running back in that regard. And right, and you could, as you said, you can sprint and say Eckler, squint and say Eckler, and I think Eckler's a really good play still. But he's hobbled. If they get up big, which I expect them to, I wouldn't be surprised to see them go to that trio of whatever, Roundtree, Kelly, whoever the hell they're playing this week. Pretty often in the second half. But yeah, I mean, I think this is where that I talked about kind of getting contrarian within chalky environments. I think this is where you can do it, right? So you look at a guy like Fournette, pretty objectively a good play this week. What I'm likely to do with Fournette is not often, not all the time, but more often than not, I'm going to correlate him with Brady. And I think that's a way you can get different here. Obviously, he's had 8 targets the last 2 weeks. He's getting red zone targets. And most of the time, I think, especially when you're talking about large field, people are not going to be doing that. So I think that's just a way you can be different around an objectively good chalky play. And, a lot of the time it is the right move actually to double stack a pass catching running back with a quarterback. Anyway, I think people are afraid of doing things like that. And then I think you can go down a little bit and just go to straight up contrarian plays. So I think going to CEH this week in your lineups where you don't have the Mahomes stacks or Hill or Kelsey makes a lot of sense. I think taking shots on guys like Mixon or Zeke, like these banged up, superstar-ish, type running backs also makes sense. So there are ways to get different, but it's definitely a week where all the ownership is going to condense around that mid-tier running back, guys with high floors, relatively high ceiling.
Yeah, and you mentioned stacking QB with pass catcher, and I have seen a lot of sharp players in the high stakes contest run out a lot of Brady Fournette combos this year. And I think it's an easy click for people when the running back has a pretty good proven pass catching track record. Like you'll see Herbert with Eckler a decent amount, Kamara, maybe even with Taysom Hill, something like that. But how far are you willing to push that? I think a good example this week would maybe be Zeke. Sounds like Tony Pollard's a legit game time decision with his plantar fasciitis. I mean, would you ever have a Dak in Zeke lineup, or for some of these running backs that don't traditionally catch a ton of passes?
Yeah, no, I definitely would have a Dak with Zeke lineup for sure. And this is kind of going into where we talked, especially with Pollard out, and he does have at least a couple catches per game type of floor, and it's just a way to have a combination that people aren't going to have. And this goes back to what I was talking about before, where yes, double stacking Lamb and Cooper is fine, especially this week with Cooper being 5,900, and I think a pretty good value. But generally, this isn't true of everyone, but I definitely think it's true of guys like Lockett and Metcalf, to a lesser extent, Higgins and Chase, maybe Keenan and Mike Williams. Generally, these guys are eating into their ceilings. I think those kind of stacks are pretty good in small field and single entry stuff. I think there's a floor to that. But I do think in large field, it is smart to get off of those double stacks. I generally believe that, especially guys that are touchdown dependent, like a Lockett and a Metcalf type of thing. So yeah, Cooper and Lamb in a high scoring offense where Dak can spread it out, that double stack, I'm not going to avoid it altogether. But I do think a good way to get different is having one of those receivers with either Schultz or Zeke. And I think that's totally okay. Yeah, you don't want to go overboard with Zeke with Dak, but I think some exposure to that combination is actually pretty smart.
Yeah. And I've had to try to open my brain up to that more, even for hand building. It's sometimes hard for me to do that. I've certainly come around to it. And it's also one of those things where I want to just be open to it in the same way of not necessarily forcing a bring back. It's like you're building, you pick a few spots in your lineup. And if you come back around on a Dak lineup where you have 7,300 left at the running back slot, and your other lineup is good to go around that. I mean, not being afraid to include a guy that projects well, and you're getting a decent macro correlation boost on the Dallas offense rolling.
Exactly.
Let's see here. So at the top, and you mentioned the Lockett Metcalf, they are actually both very affordable this week at 6,700, 6,500. And I do think if this was 2020 Russ, that this would be a pretty good double stack spot, even knowing that they've tended to be negatively correlated. But it's like this version of the Seahawks, it's a tough read because Wilson looked really bad coming back from that injury, started to see signs of life last week, his accuracy picking up. Now they get the Texans.
Yeah.
They kind of have a lot of moving parts at running back. How are you thinking about the Seahawks in this spot?
Yeah, it's a great point. It was the last thing I was looking at before I came on with you, because my initial thought early this week, and, when I talk about having small player pools, I keep a pretty tight quarterback pool as well. I wasn't including Russ early this week. And I still don't know if I am 100%. I have not decided yet, but I'm starting to lean into including him in. I'm just scared of what we've seen so far this year. I'm scared his head's out the door. They're obviously not going anywhere this year. I think he's on a new team next year. But then again, you look at some of the advanced stuff, like he is pushing the ball downfield. He at least he's trying to. Both those guys are healthy. As you mentioned, the running game isn't really there, and it's a great matchup. So I do think it makes sense to include some of him. I will not be doubling those guys. As I mentioned, I don't think it makes sense from a large field perspective. Usually I don't even let them go together, but I think Russ is a reasonable play at 6K. My only hesitation there is I talked about liking the high end. Obviously I like Mahomes, Allen, Brady quite a bit. I think Dak's okay. I think Lamar's okay. I would be surprised if he outscored those guys, every single one of them. And I would be surprised, especially even from a point per dollar perspective, if he does. So I think he's a worthy play. He's an affordable play. Good matchup, but I won't be going crazy there.
This is a good question here from Jason, and kind of a dynamic, again, we've talked about a lot on the show, especially in the small field in 3 max, and all of us out leveling each other, listening to similar DFS content, a GPP hive mind forming. And sometimes these guys like Keenan Allen, who are in every optimal build early in the week, then don't get played by the time Sunday. So Jason asks, how much do you figure in, Establish the Million, Talking Up Players, Swaying Ownership Percentage, and even other popular shows? Jason, reference me next time. Talking up players making sneaky plays turn to chalk.
Yeah, that's a good question. I should think about it more. And I do. And I think about it even when I'm going on shows like for NBA and stuff. We have a pretty loyal, subscriber group for our NBA DFS product. And I give out a flag plant 3 or 4 times a week. And I'm like, well, is this going to juice this guy up now in the small field tournaments that I'm going to play or whatever? But I try not to worry about it too much. Again, I'm really just looking at getting the right combinations and the right plays. And yes, I want to be contrarian. And if a guy that I liked early in the week was at 8% and now he's getting steamed up to 20, and I was like, I liked the play, but didn't love it. Yeah. Then I'll make a decision to, probably go a different way than maybe I thought on Tuesday on Sunday. That happens quite often. Whether it's because he's getting talked up on pods or just the field, as people get a closer look at the slate, a guy is drawing some more interest. I will, make that determination when I finally run my final builds late Saturday, early Sunday. But if I believed in a guy for a reason, ultimately I probably believed in the guy, and I'm still going to want, have interest there.
Yeah. Joe asking a question that we were diving into on the Monday lineup review. What's an okay number of points to give up from an optimal lineups in single entry and MME? And I'm very curious what Gary will say here, but I will also preface this is entirely, slate specific, right? There is no hard and fast rule. And that's why I do like looking at the projected points of the optimal and the projected cumulative ownership or product ownership of that and comparing it to mine. And I know just for my lineups last week in, tournaments sub 1,000, I was giving up around 20 ceiling projected points, but I was cutting the ownership in half of the optimal lineup. So that's generally for me a sweet spot. do you have any other rule of thumbs with that?
Yeah, I don't have an exact number there, but I do think that sounds about right? I think if you're going to be giving up, 10 points of projection, you probably want to be gaining at least 10% of ownership, leverage there. I think that is correct. And the thing I'll say there is projections are a fantastic guide and should never be absolute gospel. So, I wouldn't get too caught up in the exact amount that you're giving up, especially if you're gaining some leverage on a guy that has a seal, say you're gaining 15% ownership leverage on a 2v2 with guys that have 5-point or 4-point ceiling differentiator, whatever. There's enough variance, especially in NFL, that, I wouldn't get too caught up with that, there's always going to be a scenario. And, we talk about these guys, people that I think last week you had, someone from ASA on talking about running sims, all that kind of stuff. You see that kind of thing, there's going to be plenty of scenarios where it plays out that way, where, the guy that has a lower projection hits their higher ceiling than the guy that doesn't. So I think it's okay. And you don't have to get too caught up in it as long as you're not giving up 50 points of projection, which is just an obvious wrong move,
Yeah, and I like looking at that stuff too, almost for idea generation. Say I have a stack I really like, or even a secondary correlation I like, and you can go into an optimizer and you can set, all right, I want to cap my cumulative ownership at 100, and I'm going to lock button this stack I like. And then I can run that and see what are the optimal plays the optimizer is trying to jam in around that. Oh, this play is showing up here in the context of this. Just getting kind of like a player pool specific for that scenario to where you're not giving up too much. And I know it's tough to run that stuff, after inactives come out because you have 90 minutes to do this, but I do really find that helpful as just kind of a secondary check of like, I like this, but is the math saying this is too thin?
I think that's super, super sharp. I think using the optimizer in that way is actually the best way you can use it. Use it as a guide to get to where you want to be that week. And then use it also, for some of your smaller field stuff, maybe for some of your hand build stuff to see what kind of combinations it's spitting out. The other thing with an optimizer is, and the reason I like hand building some of the higher stake stuff is at the end of the day, you're making all your rules, you're giving caps or whatever, you're telling what you want to do. But what's most important in NFL is having the right combinations. I've mentioned that word a handful of times, and the optimizer doesn't necessarily know that, right? It's going to spit out, within your parameters, and it'll give you your highest projected lineups, but you then have to go through. It's very important that you go through because you might get combinations you might not want, even if you weren't making rules around those guys, or you might not be hitting the combinations that you need. Right. So yeah, I could love the, Brady Evans Fournette stack this week or whatever. And then I'm going to want that mix of that double stack with all the different builds, types of bringbacks. I want a Knox bring back, I want a Diggs bring back. Maybe I'll try one with no bring back, whatever. But then you're not even talking about the fact that, hey, are you making sure that you are exposed to another spot that you want to be exposed to? So are you exposed to the Chiefs game as well? Do you feel like you need to? So, is it worth making a rule that you either want a Chief or a Raider in every lineup or the Chiefs defense or something like that? I'm not saying you make that rule, but it's worthy to go through, really comb through your what kind of lineup combinations your optimizer is spitting out, because you might not be weighing off. At the end of the day, it's really like kind of a slot machine. It's going to spit out the best, it's more than slot machine because it's not random, but it's going to spit out the best options, but the combinations are not going to be necessarily what you are absolutely needing every single week, if that makes sense.
No, totally. And just to give people a frame of reference, and Gary hinted at this earlier, how we don't have as much value on the slate, which also means we don't have as much condensed ownership around punt plays. So last week, when I was looking at the optimals, the cumulative ownership was over 200 for the optimal. I ran the ETR optimal before we went on the show right now, and it's at 152 cumulative ownership, and the ceiling is at 207. And then just to give you another example of things I like to do, I force the optimizer to do a double stack with a bring back. And again, I'm not, setting that hard and fast, but I just kind of want to see the ceiling projection only came down a couple points, but the ownership, we lost, 25 percentage points of ownership. So starting to kind of mess around with those things. And now you're saying, hey, I'm happy to give up 2 projected points for added correlation and less ownership. And you can start to really get a feel. And that's also where you start to get really excited about slates, because you see, holy cow, I'm building really unique lineups that are sacrificing only a few points.
Yeah.
Then maybe you scale your play up because you feel like you have an advantage. And Leone has talked about this too, in that, ideally you would wait until Sunday morning after you start messing with your stuff to decide what you want to reg for based on your confidence level. But the way contests fill up, that's not always viable.
Yeah, that's a great point. I usually do reserve for Saturday or late Friday or whatever. But yeah, in an ideal world, that's a really good point. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It is smart to kind of start, bigger and then become smaller with your settings to see what makes the most sense on any given week.
Before we start building a lineup here, let's talk about the Chiefs. Although Corey in the Discord said he wanted us to keep this, just between ourselves, but we have a legal obligation to discuss a very intriguing spot here for the Chiefs. I was running stuff earlier, updated ceiling, ownership. I ran the Sims, and this premium double stack for the Chiefs, and I'll even toss Pringle in there. They all look good by my stuff right now. I mean, could this be the spot that the Chiefs return to glory?
Yeah, man. I mean, The thing is, we just saw this 3-4 weeks ago, and they put up 41 points in this exact spot. Now, obviously, their offense has not been the same since then, but that was in Vegas. They're home here. We are going to get some wind there, which it looks like 60 miles per hour right now, which is always kind of like that iffy spot, as if it'll actually make a difference. But I do think it would affect Carr way more than it would affect Mahomes. So, I like the Chiefs a lot here. I really do. I mean, maybe it helps that game was off the main slate a couple weeks ago, where people aren't necessarily, thinking about the fact that they just dominated this team through the air. But yeah, man, like the ownership that those guys are coming in at, and I get a lot of it's price related. If you could fit doubles in there, I think it makes a ton of sense in that spot.
That is the rub too, because you can run 1,000 optimals with a double stack and you're not going to get any Mahomes premium doubles in there, just the way there's not a ton of salary relief. But yeah, I just run here the simulator for our main slate. You see Tyreek Hill appearing in almost 21% of lineups, Travis Kelce in 12%. And it's not like they're sneaky plays, but based on current projected ownership, I was seeing 13% for Tyreek Hill. I was seeing 6% for Kelce. The Sims really like these Chiefs in comparison to their current projected ownership.
Yep. Yeah. So do I. So me and the Sims are on the same page, which is nice.
What is your take? Because we were talking about stacking running backs with quarterbacks. Ryan here in the chat mentions Clyde. Would you consider Clyde with Mahomes stuff? He doesn't look as good to me in my stuff, but curious just on that in general and for Clyde specifically this week.
Yeah, that's more of an interesting spot, obviously, because the Chiefs do have those two kind of main hogs there that we've seen being able to go together so much, and it doesn't necessarily matter as much there. And then you throw in kind of Pringle or whoever that guy that's playing the majority of snaps are. But I do think Clyde is okay there. I wish Darrell Williams wasn't there, also taking 3 or 4 targets a game. Then I feel a lot better about throwing a running back double stack in there. But I think for large field, it's okay to mess around with that a little bit. I would not go nuts.
Yeah. And my thing too is almost you're trying to make a bet on, the identity of the Chiefs this week. And we have seen their defense in the run game look good. And it's almost like you kind of are middling things where you're like, I hope they get it done on the ground with these slow, prolonged drives where it's like, no, we want the Raiders scoring points and Mahomes having to play hair on fire, catch up mode kind of thing.
It's a great point. And that's why I would prefer Clyde this week as a straight up pivot to the game. Right. I think the lineups that I have Clyde in, I don't really want much of that pass game. Secondary stacks with, a Raider pass catcher or whatever is fine. But I am, my preference would be Clyde and Chiefs D or the Chiefs D or Clyde, on their own as pivots to the game in general. Yep.
I'm going to pull up a lineup here so we can build. I just want to make one comment here about Drew saying, surprised at Cordell Patterson's sim percentage. I will say a theme of this year in the Sims has been the Sims much higher on Cordell Patterson than the field. And I would say that whatever inputs Justin has been putting in there for Cordell have been very solid because he continues to deliver and the field just always seems to find reasons to talk themselves off of Patterson. But I don't see any reason why he shouldn't be projecting well again this week.
Yeah, and he's much less matchup dependent than most running backs, right? I mean, the way he's used and the way that he's kind of like their Swiss Army knife, especially with Pitt's not doing anything there right now. So Patterson's continuing to surprise in a good way.
All right, let's pull up a lineup. We're going to build a lineup. Gary and I will talk through it, try to make the best possible decisions with the information we have now. Looks like the Deposit Kingdom League is a little less than half full. I'm pasting the link in the chat. This will fill up by Sunday morning. So if you want to get into a great rake-free contest, I highly recommend it. I can also recommend the ETR League. I believe they put the link this week in their Instagram profile. Levitan is trying to get you over there and show you his tasteful nudes. So be sure to check out the ETR Instagram for more rake-free leagues. Gary, I will toss it to you. Start with a stack, a play, anything you want to have for us to start building this lineup out.
All right, fun. Let's do it. Let's go Brady. I think let's do Brady. I think, he's under Allen and I think, there's enough people that will be off of it where I think it makes it contrarian, which is fun because it's still the most fun game environment of the week. He's at home. He throws 4 or 5 touchdowns every week. I'm not necessarily scared of the Bills pass defense. Give me some Tom Brady.
Yeah. And I'll give you stack him up with someone too here.
All right. I like Evans this week. So Godwin obviously he's more expensive finally, which, I probably should have been for a bit here, but he's 71. Evans is 66. I think the Tre'Davious White thing is really big for Mike Evans. And, I think it's just, and the way, and like, there's no necessarily data behind things like this, but the way Brady likes to go. If, a guy got his last week, I think he likes to try to make that guy get his this week. And, at that price, that mid tier, for Evans, not necessarily coming through with too much ownership, I like that stack quite a bit.
Would you go so far as to say Mike Evans is going to fuck this week and impregnate the Bills defenders? Like
that's exactly what I was actually thinking. I think he's whipping it out. He's getting it all done for them.
There you go.
Yeah.
Highly recommend listening to Establish the Show with an always tipsy Evan Silva on Friday nights. One of the more enjoyable listens of the week.
It definitely is.
Let's see here. I like your Dawson Knox call, and I'm going to go ahead and toss him in as our bring back here. I guess the only reason maybe we would undo that is if you really liked Gronk as the second piece, and then we probably wouldn't want to be running double tight ends here, but we can either single Brady or maybe you introduce Fournette. Completely up to you.
Yeah. So, no, I like Knox in that spot because part of the reason to me going to Evans on a lot of these things is I think Evans and Godwin are fine together. I think, Godwin and Evans with Fournette are fine together. But I think with Gronk, you either want him doubling with Fournette or with Godwin. I think Gronk and Evans eat into each other a little bit with their touchdown stuff. So, from a ceiling perspective, I don't think they're necessarily an optimal double stack. So I would prefer Knox with Evans for sure. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
All right. Back over to you here.
Yeah, I think going with Fournette, especially in, a 400 person contest like this is a pretty smart play. So let's see if we can do that and see where we can go from there.
Yeah. And I'm also going to be putting this lineup in my spreadsheet here just so I can give you guys an idea of the cumulative ownership and projected ceiling relative to the optimal. And then Gary and I can finish up by talking if we're giving up too many projected points, if we're looking good here. We will have to save a little bit of money. We'll have to find a salary relief guy. I am right now. It's so hard, like building these with the injury stuff right now. But I'm going to go ahead. And put in one of the Chargers punt play wide receivers for us. I'm going to go with Palmer. I do prefer him to Guyton. Are you Palmer over Guyton as well?
Oh man, he's my most owned guy in all of best ball, Josh Palmer. So I'm hoping for a big Josh Palmer week.
All right, just we call that redacted around here. We don't want you to get arrested, Gary.
Sorry about that.
So we'll put him in to start saving us some money. But back over to you.
Yeah, I was going to do something similar with salary relief. I don't think Eli Mitchell plays this week. Do you?
I don't either. And I'm curious your take on it because it does look like Jeff Wilson is projecting well. The team hasn't seemed to love him. I feel like we're going to see a decent amount of Hasty, but give me your 49ers backfield take.
Yeah, I like Wilson. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a little bit different this year than in years past as far as what you just said. I don't know if Shanahan still has in love with Wilson as he had been in previous years, but I think he trusts him. A little bit worried about the production. I think he's like under 3 yards a carry for any real amount of carries he's had. But I think, if Mitchell's out, we know the way they like to play. They want to keep the ball on the ground. At 4,400, we have him at like 4.3% owned right now. Obviously, if Mitchell gets ruled out, that'll get, up there. But I think in a week where there's very little salary relief, kind of the Sony Michel's of last week, I don't see why he can't be that. I think if Mitchell's out, he does have a floor here. And I like Wilson quite a bit.
I like it. I will go ahead then. I will correlate with a man that has burned people for multiple straight weeks, including just a horrendous drop last week. Doing this one for Leone. I love Jamar Chase at this very nice $6,900 price tag. And we also get the kind of secondary correlation there with Wilson.
Yeah, I love that. It's probably where I would have ended up too. So awesome.
Okay. Let's figure out our defense. Seahawks are going to be mega chalk this week at 3,100. It looks like the Browns and Panthers are also going to be fairly popular. If we can make it work, I would say playing the Chiefs defense looks like the next best bet, or maybe we go down to the Ravens if we need to save 500.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we're not putting a Chiefs Raider guy in the flex, I would like to put the Chiefs defense in here, I think.
Okay. And we can move this around. That would give us 5,800. If we went Ravens, we could get up to 6,200 in the flex.
Right. So, that's something to consider here, because I think in that flex, like I think Amari Cooper at 5,900 or something, this week is pretty interesting, assuming he has a clean bill of health. That price is just too cheap for his upside in this spot, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And this would be, I'm going to go ahead and toss Palmer here in our flex. The other thing that's nice here about how this lineup is shaking out is we're going to get not a ton, or maybe I shouldn't say nice. We're not going to have a ton of information early, because we will just have basically Amari. Is Amari our only early guy? So I think we definitely want to go with a defense that is playing early.
That's a good point. Yep.
How do you feel about that in general? I think I like this lineup, and I'll plug it in here in a sec. I think in a perfect world, I would like maybe 3 or 4 guys going early just for more information. But how do you feel about that?
No, it's a great point. I don't like having little to no information. So I think that's fair. Again, I don't get too caught up in it. Because at the end of the day, I'm just looking for the nuts. But and if it's going to come from the 4 o'clocks, it's going to come from the 4 o'clocks. But I do think it helps when you've hit on a guy that is going to be in the perfect lineup at 1 o'clock. You know that you have that information ahead of you. Conversely, if you put Cooper in there and Lamb hits 33 points, and you need to get different, I think that's worthy of things. But the flip side of that is you're leaving yourself enough flexibility to do that as well. But I understand the argument both ways.
And you're still getting information via other chalk plays that aren't in your lineup for the field, so you can know. And the other nice thing about this is, like, obviously if the chalk smashes early and there's big point totals, like, all right, I need to get off of Josh Palmer most likely as the cheap and go to that thing we were saying where, hey, let's middle it a little bit more with some 5K guys that could access a ceiling. I typed this one into my stuff. I'm seeing a ceiling of 189 compared to the 207 optimal. So giving up 18, but then we're slashing the ownership in half. We went from 152 to 77,
which is a nice number. 77 is a nice number. And we have some salary left over. Obviously you can make some late swap decisions here quite a bit. So I have no problem with that.
Yeah, I think this lineup looks good to me. I would see if we maybe get some other info as the week progresses, specifically on Palmer, Jeff Wilson, all that stuff. But I like how that lineup shook out for sure. And Gary, I appreciate you chopping it up with us today.
No, man, I really do appreciate you having me on. I've been a listener and a watcher for a while. So thank you. And, anytime.
And where are you're generally behind the ETR paywall over there for NBA, correct?
Yeah. I'm on the live show. So like the pre-lock show, anywhere from like 2 to 4 times a week, behind the paywall. Every now and then you might see me pop on the free injury show, which is at 2 o'clock on the ETR NBA YouTube page. Usually that's Gallagher and Dink, but I'll fill in there sometimes. But you can check me out if you're into collectibles. I have the Establish the Collection podcast with Showdown King Cody Main. We release that once a week. We're talking NFTs, we're talking Top Shot, we're talking traditional cardboard. And I also have my own DFS pod called Look Who's Chalking. If you're interested in more GPP takes, can be found wherever you get your podcasts. It's kind of a mix of a comedy and GPP show. So it's a
mix of comedy and GPP show. That sounds right up my alley.
It almost sounds like I'm coming on someone's corner, except we have very, very few listeners and watchers. But check it out if you're interested. It's fun.
No, I do. When do you guys normally record? I got to add that to my
I appreciate
rotation.
That. We usually record like Wednesday or Thursday, and my co-host has a background in video editing and audio editing, so he does everything on his own, and we usually will release either Thursday or Friday. I think it should be coming out actually pretty soon.
Awesome. Appreciate that. Drew says plug your wedding registry. Congratulations
Thank you.
on the upcoming wedding. I will get a couple plugs in, hop in the Deposit Kingdom rake free tournament. I still highly recommend getting subbed up to Run the Sims. You can run those throughout the week as updated information comes in. I love comparing that to projected ownership, see where there might be an edge. And of course, if you're Gary, you're more of an Opto Bro. I do have my hand builder hoodies. I did actually put the Opto Bro hoodies in the store. So if you're more of a Gary there, you're happy to select one of those in the store. There's also discounts if you're in the Run the Sims channel in the Deposit Kingdom Discord. Thanks again to Gary. Good luck this week. I will be back Sunday at 10:30 a.m. to run through things again with all that updated information. Good luck this week. Have a great weekend. Peace out.